Nintendo's amiibo figures look great as they are, but customizing is a way of making them even more special. I'm TJ, and it's my mission to make the map that removes the mystery from amiibo to help you chart the course to conquer your favorite custom challenges and achieve the unique and personalized amiibo you always wanted. Let me make the mistakes so you don't have to.
Adventure time! I'm bored already.
That's Mii TJ and Dark TJ. They'll be popping up from time to offer some tips, tricks, and helpful hints.
Don't listen to anything this guy has to say. He has no idea what he's doing.
Or not so helpful. It's dangerous to go alone, so come with us and we'll conquer this custom together. Welcome to Custom Conquest. Hey everybody, glad you could make it. For our first episode, we're going to be dealing with a very personal amiibo. It's going to be one of
Me!
Us. Me. Us. And we're going to use as our base the Mii Swordfighter. Now the advantage of this bad boy is he can be set to any kind of in-game appearance that we want. But for me, it's really important that the exterior of the figure matches what it is when we scan it into the game. You guys probably recognize Mii TJ and Dark TJ from Smash Supremacy and Mii v Mii, and it's helpful for me to be able to pull the amiibo from the shelf by being able to recognize them on site. And chances are you probably have your own custom Mii that you'd like to make resemble yourself. You. A Mii of you. So the techniques that we cover in this episode will not only teach you how to make one of these two guys if for some reason you wanted to, but it'll also help arm you with the tools and techniques to make whatever Mii you want. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm not a professional artist by any means, but I have been customizing figures from various lines for about 15 years, and during that time I've picked up a lot of tricks. So I'm going to do my best to impart what I've learned to you, and together maybe we'll find victory in our custom conquest. Let's get to it! As someone who is artistically inclined, but in no way of a professional caliber, I've created a difficulty rating based on my personal assessment and criteria. Results may vary. TJ's a 3. If you employ the process I use here, you'll be able to achieve something like this no problem. Dark TJ is considerably more difficult because the pose that I wanted to put him in is not as similar to the one that the Swordfighter amiibo is already in. The first thing we need to take a look at are the components, the figures, pieces, and parts that it's going to require to put this thing together. To make a Mii TJ and Dark TJ, we need 2 Mii Swordfighters. Because I imagine I'm going to make a few sets of TJ and Dark TJ, it's important to me that they're as uniform as possible. I have a reasonably capable hand, but I don't think that I can make them all as identical as I want. So what I did instead is I ordered a vinyl bumper sticker that I could cut out and use to make the eyebrows, eyes, and mouth of TJ and Dark TJ. Now for the equipment, tools, and supplies. Now my preference is this bad boy right here. It combines a good grip with a rounded edge, so you can grab that amiibo and it's probably going to return to shape without much of an issue.
Boring! When are we gonna start breaking some toys?
You're definitely going to need some kind of cutting device. Because we're doing some reshaping on TJ and Dark TJ, we're going to need something to fill in those grooves. There's a 2-part epoxy putty called Milliput. Full disclosure, on this project I also used Sculpey, which is an oven-baked clay. When I make another TJ and Dark TJ, I imagine I will only use the Milliput. I just used a medium-grade sandpaper. A lot of time I find I use a disposable nail file. I bought a box of them for, I don't know, like $1 or something. You're also going to need some kind of glue to stick things together. The question I get asked most by people is what paint I use. I've used everything out there, Americana, folk art, but the one that I liked the best was Citadel figure paints because I use my amiibo all the time, as you know, for Smash Supremacy and Mii v Mii, so I want a paint that's going to be able to hold up to constant handling. Citadel is not particularly easy to find and it's certainly not cheap, so I tried Vallejo model color, and I would say that the result is very comparable to Citadel. On the brush front, I used 2 different brushes primarily. One that has a wider surface area for some of the larger, smoother spots, and then one that is a very pointy, fine-tipped brush that allowed me to get the kind of details that I wanted. I should also mention I'm not endorsing any of these brands. I don't have any kind of affiliation or sponsorship. I'm just trying to be explicitly honest with you so that you know exactly how I achieved the results that I got. In this section, we're going to lay out the game plan. So here we've got the Swordfighter amiibo. His head is roughly the same shape as TJ and Dark TJ, so I don't think we're going to have any kind of problem there. And he has the same nose as they do. His eyes, eyebrow, and mouth, though, are going to have to go, so that means a full repainting of the face. The hair has some similarities in the back to Dark TJ, but for both of them, we're going to have to shave off that front and then rebuild it with our sculpting putty. For TJ, we're going to want to bend that back arm at the elbow joint and turn it skyward and rotate the hand into more of a supinated position. And the sword arm, we're going to straighten it out. The torso for TJ is a pretty good match. TJ is looking over his right shoulder, so we're gonna have to swivel the head. The legs appear to be almost exactly in the same position as TJ's, so we're not gonna have to adjust it at all. In fact, we don't even really need to remove it from the base, and we don't have to take the NFC chip out if we don't want to. Now let's check out Dark TJ. The story is the same for the face. We don't need to do any resculpting, but we are going to have to readdress that hair. While the extension of his arms does match Dark TJ's victory pose, the angle isn't quite there. We're going to close that right arm and angle the left arm so that it's pointing up towards the sky. While both characters exhibit ambidextrous tendencies, Dark TJ most commonly carries his sword in his left hand. So we're going to see what we can do about switching that. And then we're going to have to take that open left hand and find some way to close the grip around the sword. If we switch the sword to his left hand, that means we also need to reverse the direction of the baldric. If you've ever drawn a sword before, you know that you always pull from the opposite hip. Dark TJ's legs are in an entirely different position. If scoring makes them flexible enough to be able to create a new position, then great. If not, we'll remove the legs altogether and reassemble them into the position that we want. All right, we got our plan all mapped out.
Let's go conquer this custom!
Alright, so let's walk you through the process. The first thing we're going to need to do is get some heat treatment so that we can separate the parts that we want off the Mii Fighter. My preferred method is boiling water because it's really fast. Once the water's boiling, you stick the figure in there for a matter of seconds really, and it will allow you to be able to separate it very easily. I've seen other people do it with a heat gun or by using them in the oven. I don't have a heat gun, and I have used the oven, but it takes much longer, and the results are not really as good. It won't do anything to hurt your figure, including the NFC chip. You can literally just stick it in the oven or throw it in the boiling water, and it will come out just fine. I tested it on several dozen amiibo, and I have not had a single incident where the NFC chip has been compromised. Now that I got my figure separated into the pieces that I want, I'm gonna start working on reshaping him. For TJ, as we said, we don't need to do anything to the lower body. His legs are in the exact position I want him to be, and his upper torso is fine too, but I need to change the direction of his head, I need to straighten the sword arm, and I need his back arm to be bent up, with his hand in more of a supinated position. Instead of using the Milliput or the Sculpey to bond the parts together, I'm gonna create a little bit of flexible boning. So I'm gonna use a thumbtack to stick it into the plastic on each side, and then stick a paper clip in the hole. If you want to make it even more secure, you can put a tiny little dab of super glue on that paper clip, and that's going to lock it in there. And now what I've effectively created is a flexible joint, and I can bend his back arm however I want, and I can straighten out his front arm, and it's going to be pretty secure. After I have my bones in place, I'm going to use the Milliput or the Sculpey to fill in the gaps and smooth it out. Most of the work for TJ comes in the form of his hair, but I can still use the Mii Swordfighter as a base, so I'm going to trim off the extra bits in the front and then build up on it with the putty. If you use the Sculpey, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time in the oven. 275 for 15 minutes should do the trick. But Milliput is an air dry epoxy, so you can just let it sit for a few hours and it will be solid as a rock. If you do go the Sculpey route, you can make it really smooth by hand. Even though I have a bunch of special tools, I don't really use them.
You're a special tool.
Most of the time I do my smoothing with a toothpick because the toothpicks are very cheap and disposable.
You're cheap and disposable.
So once I'm done using it, I can just toss it out. If you use the Milliput, you may not be able to get quite as smooth by hand, but apply a little bit of water and use the toothpick to get into those crevices, and you can get it pretty smooth. If you don't like it, Milliput holds up really well to some sanding after the fact, which you can use your sandpaper or your nail file. Now, Dark TJ was pretty tricky. Neither leg were in the position that I wanted them to be, so I wound up cutting them completely off and using the same boning method that I did with TJ. His arms, however, required a little bit less work because his right arm has the correct bend in it and I want his left arm to be straight. But the tough part is I want to remove the sword from his right arm and put it into his left. So using the X-acto knife and being extremely careful, I removed the sword from his hands at the pommel and the crossguard. I then used the X-acto knife to restore a little bit of curvature to his hand and thumb, and I sanded it to make it a little bit smoother. For his left hand, I used the X-acto knife to cut between each individual finger to diminish the resilience of the plastic and to increase the flexibility so that I can curve the fingers around the grip of the sword. Since the grip of the sword doesn't exist, I reconstructed it using the base end of the toothpick. So now I have pretty much a standalone sword that I can do anything that I want with. So I put it into Dark TJ's left hand. I used heat treatment to curve his fingers around the grip the way that I wanted it to be, and once I was confident that the plastic was going to stay, I used some super glue to lock it tight. Probably the toughest thing about switching the sword to the left hand was actually changing the baldric to be a left-handed baldric. I very carefully carved it off with the X-acto knife. Once I had Dark TJ's baldric aligned, I glued it into position and then sanded down any rough edges. I also rotated the torso backwards because it aligned a little bit better with how I wanted his pose to be. I used the putty to construct DT Apoxie's hair, much the same as I did with TJ, except in a way that favors his style. And for Dark TJ, we also added that manly chin patch. I plugged in more than a few times so that I can take advantage of the 3D model of my Mii while sculpting the hair, because I wanted to know exactly what shape things looked like in 3D space. And I gotta say, it's really awesome to be able to have 360-degree reference of what you're working on. In order to make the heads a little bit easier to work on, I put a dab of super glue to stick a toothpick in there, and I stuck the other end through a bottle cap. It just made it a little bit easier for me to be able to paint it and handle it without having to touch it. I primed it up and set to work on painting. You'll probably hear over and over again,
"Thin your paints."
And with good reason. It will prevent the final product from looking chunky and clunky and heavily textured in an undesirable way. Although, to be honest, it changes depending on what I'm painting. When I'm doing really small details, I personally like the paint to be a little bit thicker because I don't want to have to do it more than once. But if you make it too thick, it becomes a little unwieldy. I didn't feel like I needed to prime TJ's body because the only thing that I was repainting was his shirt, and the Mii figure that I had didn't really have very neat lines on his baldric, so I touched it up with brown to make it a little bit cleaner. I also sharpened up the edges on his metal components with the silver. Even though TJ's skin tone is pretty close to the Mii Swordfighter's, I don't want to attempt to match that because I'm doing an eye, eyebrow, and mouth replacement. For TJ, I just used a basic skin tone, but Dark TJ being a shadow, I used a light sky gray for his face. I drew the shape of the stubble, and once I was satisfied with it, I painted it in with a gray tone. I did make several different attempts for the eyes, eyebrows, and mouth to see what I was happiest with. I started by drawing it on with pencil so that I could see where I wanted it to be. When I made mistakes, I erased it. The Vallejo paint holds up to quite a bit of handling. Once I had the heads looking good, I stuck them onto the body with some super glue and trimmed out my vinyl stickers, my mouth, eyebrows, and eyes to give them that unique signature look.
Wow, it's a Mii Mii! Let's see the Mii Us's in action.
So thanks for watching the show, and I hope you learned something, but I also want to reinforce that my way is not the only way. The tricks that I used and the techniques that I used to customize these Mii are just the path that I chose to do it. If you have a different way or a better way, I'd love to hear about it in the comments section below. Who knows, maybe you're gonna teach me. So let's team up and do this together. I really love this community and I enjoy seeing all the customs that are out there. So if you're a customizer, or you've dabbled, or you try one of the things from this episode, or you go your own route and make your own, please send me a picture and I would be happy to feature it in the next episode. Tweet me your pictures at Custom Conquest and make sure to use the hashtag #MyCCAmiibo. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for playing. Dark side out. There's no topping this episode. We already made the best amiibo out there. Heh heh.